Well, let's go ahead and get started. I love coming to Tiger Talks because I think it is wonderful to get to first hear from all of you and understand what you do, what you're looking for, and understand why you might be here today. So let's get right into it. We are talking about competition, how to beat them, and how to beat them when maybe you don't have the resources, the tools that they have, the budget that they have, so how we can still find a way to come out on top. So just quickly, a little bit about me. As Neil said, I've been coming to Tiger Talks for about a year now. A partner at Braveheart Sales Performance. At Braveheart, what we do is we help CEOs, business owners who are frustrated by a lack of growth. The way we do that is different because all of our clients' needs are very different. It's not a cookie cutter approach, but ultimately what we are focused on is understanding what is driving the behaviors that we're seeing. So we use a data-driven approach to diagnose the underlying causes of some of the symptoms that you see. Symptoms like not enough sales or a business that's not closing fast enough. So ultimately what we do is we help sellers sell, leaders lead, so that then companies can succeed. I also put on here that I am in my free time a high school lacrosse coach at Thomas Worthington High School. I think that's important for you to know because I'm a coach at heart. And so while I love sales, I love selling, it's something that I feel passionately about. I care more about helping others do that better. It's something that I take a lot of joy out of. So today is all about you guys. So by all means, it is intended to be interactive. So as we go, if you have a question or there's something that you want to know more about, please don't hesitate to raise your hand, speak up, ask that question, because we want to make sure that you guys take what you need out of this. So I want to see show of hands. We're starting right away with the interactive piece here. Who in the room sells to customers on a regular basis? Okay, a little more than half of us. Who in the room doesn't necessarily sell, but is responsible in some way for helping others sell? So pretty much everyone else. So we care about this topic, and sales and growth is important to us. Good, you've come to the right place. So I want to talk about the difference between sales and marketing, because oftentimes, especially when maybe your business is in its infancy or you are at a crossroads and you're looking to grow, you need to consider both things. But what we think is really important is to understand where marketing ends and sales begin, but there has to be an overlap, there has to be an alignment. We are not marketing experts at Braveheart. We are sales experts, but we also understand that there needs to be a cooperation. And we like to think about it as smarketing, where you're really thinking about both of them hand in hand, and they really need to support one another. Ultimately, they both need to communicate the value that you deliver for your customers. They both need to differentiate so that people understand why you're different from your competitors, or why working with you would be different than doing nothing at all, possibly. And they have to drive revenue. They both need to be aligned for those three goals. So I want to first talk about differentiation. So I want to hear from you again with the audience participation. Shout out, what are some of the biggest challenges you face in your business with differentiating from your particular competition? What makes it hard?
Limited belief systems.
Say that again, louder, please.
Limited belief systems.
Limiting belief system, so your own beliefs limiting you, is that, or your customers? Customers limiting beliefs, okay? What else? Reaching out to a mass audience, so getting the word out there, making sure people know about you, it's a challenge. What else did I hear? Budget, that's always a challenge. What else?
Relatively basic product that needs to be differentiated.
Needs to be differentiated. There's other people maybe that can do the same thing or similar, and so how do you differentiate that?
Saturated local market, lots of the same companies doing very similar things.
Okay, so when there's lots of competitors, that means that there is absolutely a need for what you do, so that's great, because sometimes we're in a situation where maybe we're convincing people why. You're not convincing them why, you're convincing them why us. So that's a very different conversation. Okay, anything else? One more.
Noise and hype.
Say it again.
Noise and hype.
Noise and hype. Say more about that.
AI. Everybody's an AI company. What is that?
We have several AI companies here today, yeah. What does AI even mean? Yeah. Okay, so a lot of these things, it all has to do with how do we get people to know about us, how do we get people to understand what's different about us, and how do we get them to understand why that's important and why would they want to work with us. So when we think about differentiating, there's really two things you need to be focused on. First, you need to become excellent, and if it's not you communicating value, if it's somebody else in your organization, you need to make sure they are excellent at communicating that value in a way that means something to the people that need whatever it is that you sell, your products, your services. And so it has to roll off their tongue easily. They need to be able to do it in their sleep, but it also needs to land with the person they're speaking to. The other thing we're going to talk about, it's not just the words that you use and the way that you speak, it's how you yourself can actually be valuable. It's, I would argue, more important and also harder to achieve, but it really gets boiled down to following a simple system. And if you can follow that system, it becomes a lot easier. You can crack the code. When you show up for sales conversations, and you are able to demonstrate the value. In other words, get somebody to think about something differently, identify a problem or a challenge they didn't even know that they had, and by the way, you're the only one that can solve it. You have now elevated yourself, and you have generated tremendous urgency where maybe there was none before. Maybe they didn't even think that they had that problem or didn't know that they needed whatever it is that you offer. So I want to talk about value propositions. So some of you gave some value propositions here just a couple of moments ago. So what we do in our business is we start out with a evaluation where we take a look at the existing team when one exists and identify strengths, weaknesses, gaps, and opportunities. And part of this process involves asking them, what's your value proposition? Nothing more than that. We say, give us your value proposition. And you would expect that professional salespeople would be able to do that. These are real life examples from a client in the security alarm industry, not based here locally, of their answers to what is your value proposition. We got the best and most honorable. No idea what this is. I truly believe that XYZ Security offers the best value for my client's dollar. Okay, not terrible. What? Provide good value. So what do we think about these, good or bad? Not very good, right? Awful, I'm with you. And so I share this with you because the reality is that there's tons of people out there that are constantly trying to vie for your customers' time and attention. And the reality is, just like in any other profession, there's a lot of people who don't do it very well. So if we can just get you to leave here today with a couple of tools in your toolkit, to be better than that, you're already ahead. But also just to get you to see how it's easy to identify what not so good or what bad looks like. So let's use that as we go forward to try to craft our personal value proposition statements. So when we think about a value proposition, it's not a marketing tagline, right? You have a website for that. You have marketing collateral for that. It is not the length of time you have been in business. It's not, to brag about all that you've accomplished. It's not that you are family owned or whatever else you may be able to tout. Those are wonderful things. Those are important things. Many of your customers probably care about those things, but that's not the most important thing to them. If you do not expressly tell them what is important about what you do, why they should care about it, what the impact is going to be to them, they're going to make up their own story in their mind. And all they're going to remember is that you've been in business for 40 years, but that you do the same exact thing as the person sitting next to you. So you have to be intentional when you're crafting your value proposition statements. So we like to use a little acronym, and your value proposition statement should be what we call FAB. So you first want to start with features. This is what you do. And when you think about the features, I like to think about what are the things that are features unique to your business. So if any of you are familiar with EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, there's a philosophy that there are no two businesses in the world that have these three uniques in common. In other words, there are at least three things unique about your business, the way you conduct yourself, the value that you deliver for your customers, that nobody else in the world has all of those. Maybe they have one, maybe they have two. They don't have all three. So when you're thinking about what your value proposition is, I would encourage you to spend some time and think about what are those three things that make you truly different, all three of those combined, from anyone else in the world. Then you want to think about, with those features, what's the advantage? Why is that good? What is the impact that that has? Is it solving a problem? Is it safeguarding for the future? Is it enabling growth? What's the advantage? And then you want to think about, why does that matter? Why is it important? Not just to that business, to that individual. Why is it important to them personally? If you've ever heard anyone talk about pain versus gain, it's a real thing. So when you talk about all of the things that are awesome, that's great. There's a lot of good things, and people want to hear how you're going to help them and how you're going to make things better. But what actually drives human behavior, what actually gets people to want to change, to want to do something, to part with their hard-earned money, you have to talk about pain and fear. And so I would encourage you that let's think about, what are the features, the advantages, the benefits of working with you, and how can we pull out the fear and the pain that the person on the other side of that message might potentially experience if they don't work with you. So it's a 5-part process. First, you want to identify who your ICP is, your ideal customer profile. And many of you probably know who that is, but I would encourage that if your product or service has changed at all, if you've evolved at all, if your customer has changed or evolved at all since you've started doing business, that this is a great thing to revisit and just consider, who are they? Get as granular as you can, demographic and psychographic. What are the differentiators from your competitors? Again, this goes back to your three uniques. What's different from everyone else out there if you combine them all together that nobody else has? What's the benefit to that ideal customer? Recognizing there may and probably is some benefit to people who are outside of that ideal customer profile, but what is the true benefit to the right customer, the customer you want to work with, that's going to get the maximum benefit, that is going to pay you on time and is going to be a joy to work with, and all of those good things? What's the opposite of your benefit? So back to that concept of pain and fear, what does that look like? If they do not have this benefit, what does that mean? What does that mean for their business? What does that mean for them personally? You hear people talk about what keeps people up at night. This is that stuff. That's what we're talking about here. And then what we want to do is we want to formulate the best questions we can to expose that pain, expose that fear. And I'm going to pause here for a second, because the thing about sales, truly, the thing that really differentiates it from marketing is selling ain't telling. Selling is asking. To be truly effective at demonstrating value, at differentiating from the competition, you have to be really adept at asking good, thought-provoking questions. And so all of this does not matter if all you're going to do is show up and throw up and tell them why you're so great and why you should work with us and we're so wonderful. You have to stop. You have to ask questions. You have to understand what's in it for them, what's important to them. And you also have to know all of your features, advantages, and benefits so well that you can be able to pivot in those conversations that you're having to adapt to what's important to them. Because odds are, not all of the things that you do so wonderful are always going to be important to that person. You have to identify. Yes, question?
Just curious, if you're transitioning more to a direct-to-consumer,
Mm-hmm.
you're transitioning, not working, transitioning to a direct-to-consumer sales channels online, how do you address those last couple of aspects specifically?
Great question.
It's really hard to ask them what pain points.
Great question. So in that kind of situation, you don't have the luxury of having that one-to-one conversation. You still need to do the work at some point in the process to have that one-to-one interaction with your customers. Maybe it's before you launch. And then you need to make sure that your website and whatever other collateral there is addressing those concerns. And so you need to lead with what the problem could potentially be so that they can very easily self-identify and make it super simple for them. Does that answer your question? Great. Okay, so we're gonna try it. So I'm gonna put up all of those 5 steps, and what I would like you to do, we are not role playing, by the way, so everyone, you can take a deep breath, but I would like you to turn to somebody next to you, and I would like you to share, as we've been talking about this, who your ICP is, what differentiates you, what's the feature advantage benefit, and just have a couple of minutes, no more than 2 minutes here of conversation. And we are gonna ask you to share, so make sure you're listening. All right, I'm gonna bring us back now. Wrap up your conversations. All right, so sounds like you guys all had, from the discussion in the room, sounds like we had a lot of good conversations there. I'm gonna ask that we share a couple. So if there's anyone who would like to share, not yours, but what your partner shared, now would be an excellent time. Let's do 2, maybe 3, depending on time. Who wants to go first?
I'll give you the mic.
I'll just call on you if you don't want to volunteer. So you guys had good conversation up here. Why don't we pick you guys, front row, my front rowers?
Eric already gave his, I think, actually.
So there we go.
Alright, so I'm supposed to present his, right?
Yes.
So his ideal customer profile is a brick and mortar company that kind of is social media savvy, but is willing to learn more and get more exposure and try a different method of marketing.
Okay, and what's a differentiator for him?
It's a completely different way of marketing, so it's he doesn't really have too many other competitors.
Okay, great. What's the benefit to them? What's good about working with him?
More exposure because it is a social media platform, and so they will get more clients and then more money.
What happens if they don't work with him?
They won't get that exposure, they won't be able to scale and expand.
Okay, did you guys get to questions or not yet? Eric, if you could share, what's one question, not to put you on the spot, but that you might ask in an initial conversation with a small business to understand if maybe there's a need? What's one question you could ask?
Well, my lead-in is normally, do you promote your business on Instagram? And so, how's that working for you, and what does it look like?
Mm-hmm. Great, and so kind of starts the conversation. If they say yes, then you get an understanding of what they're currently doing today. Sounds like you can increase some efficiencies and some effectiveness. If they say no, then there's still an opportunity there because it sounds like, that there's...
Well, in a way, it's a numbers game, and I'd rather
Okay.
speak to people who are poised and ready, 85% the way. I can bring them 15% there. I can't bring them 100%.
Right.
It might not be the right time.
Right, and so for some people, maybe there's just no interest in advertising in that way, and so they're not a good fit, and you want to know that up front and not spend a bunch of time with them.
Well, there's the 15% that I'm talking about. It's like someone who says, I don't have Instagram right now, but I want to get better at that.
Mm-hmm.
I can make you an Instagram today, and we'll get you up and running.
Great.
So that part is an easy inroad if they're open and trusting enough.
Great, but that's a start of a good conversation. Awesome, everyone give them a hand, that was great, great job. One more. We have time for one more group. Who wants to share? Carter, I'm gonna pick on you because you guys used to be a client. So I'm gonna have you guys go. Right back here, Neil.
Awesome, thank you. So we were discussing that your ideal client would be someone who is struggling to be active, struggling to get off the couch, get motivated. And so your differentiators are, you're not necessarily, I'm trying to remember what you said. You weren't trying to, you're not really competing with other people. You are trying to just get them active and off the couch. So you're not saying, hey, it matters to me that you come to me. It matters that you're just doing it for yourself and for the betterment of your individual motivation or whatever you want to say.
So the competition isn't that they're taking an Orange Theory class, it's that they're doing nothing. So we want to get them doing
My
something.
biggest competitor is the couch.
Okay.
Yeah, I did say that. My biggest competitor is the couch. There are other dance instructors, there's other places you can do fitness, but the biggest competitor is getting people, especially when you're direct to consumer, and I'm sure a lot of people in here have this problem, getting people to actually act.
Okay, so with you, there's obviously differentiators in that it's a healthy lifestyle versus an unhealthy lifestyle. So people get that. What would be different about, so Carter, I'm gonna ask you to share her differentiators compared to some of those other studios.
You make it a more fun environment for the way you teach them to, not really teaching them, but leading them with your fun, interactive dancing classes, and really your non-judgmental environment, and everyone's there to obviously have fun and express themselves in a fun, active way rather than just, walking on the treadmill and stuff like that. So.
I couldn't have said that better myself.
That's great. What's the benefit? Let's take it one step further. Why is that important for people's lives?
Because it can be hard to say, I'm gonna get up and walk on a treadmill for 60 minutes and stare at my blank wall. Whether, people have their music, they're watching their iPhone, whatever. That can get old pretty quickly, but when you're engaging with other people and it's just a different environment, you're not looking at the same space every single day, it can definitely be a bigger motivator than taking those quick 5 steps to your treadmill.
And what about those who don't take that step? What is the potential harm or risk of never coming to the studio?
Fatty liver.
Fatty liver.
And what could that cause? What does it mean when you have fatty liver?
Okay, so that was one of my dance team guys told me that his doctor told him he had a fatty liver,
Okay.
and that was really, really, really bad. He's a gamer, so he does a lot of this, right? He started dancing with me. He hasn't changed his diet at all, like his doctor told him to. But now that he's been dancing with me several nights a week, he doesn't have a fatty liver at all. He's cured. So he credits that to me. So physically, what is the problem with a fatty liver? I don't know because I'm not a doctor. It just sounds bad, doesn't it?
It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like something you want. So when you're thinking about, so thank you, Carter. Did you guys get to questions? Did you have time to get to questions?
She had one very good one and then was cut off.
Okay, let's hear the good one.
The good one was, you have to remind me here.
It's okay to help them out.
Because we're trying to focus on social, I asked, are you lonely?
Because my biggest competitor is also going to leave you lonely because that couch isn't going to interact with you at all.
So that's a great example. I love that. So does everyone see how that question has nothing to do with dance? Nothing at all. But it's just asking a question about somebody's lifestyle that gets to, first of all, know them a little bit better, gets them to open up, but also identifies some potential bigger things going on. Whereas you might not consider that taking a class could prevent your loneliness. but it gets them thinking differently. So great job, give them a hand, great job. All right, so that was just a very brief exercise. If this is something that you think would be helpful to do in a more in-depth way when you leave here today, or if you have others in your organization, I'd encourage you to scan the QR code. I'll put it up at the end as well. This will take you to a page where you can download our free value proposition creation toolkit that is going to give you some more ideas of how you can continue to refine that, and also build some really great questions so that you can transform the way you're conducting yourself and having these sales conversations. And I'll put it up at the end. So we talked about the value proposition, but it's more than that. In order to be effective to actually grow sales, you need to put in place a system for how you're going to do this consistently. You need to have something that is going to be repeatable so that as you grow, as you scale, it can also be done by others with the same repeatable, predictable results. So we're going to talk about the sales process. You can have your own sales process. There's tons of sales processes out there, but when you're thinking about what your process should be, there's some things you need to consider. It has to be clearly defined, meaning you need to identify what the steps along the way are. It's not a project process. It is not necessarily how people work with you. It's not a workflow. It is truly what is the information that needs to be exchanged, in what order, in what way, for us to know that we're going to work together and for us to both feel good about it. It has to be followed by all. So for those of you who it's just you, great, that's easy. But if you have a desire to continue to build your business and not have the sales hat on forever, you need to make sure that as you bring others into the organization, they are following this. And it's going to require some oversight, some management, some accountability on your part. And it also has to be able to be followed by all. It cannot be unique to your personality. And this is just the way I like to do things. I'm not suggesting that you need to have all sellers within an organization be robots or clones of one another, not at all. They can all have their own style, their own temperament, their own personality, but they need to follow the same process. It has to be milestone centric. There has to be key decision points within it that tell us yes or no. It's a go or a no-go. So Eric's was great. He asks about Instagram. And that's kind of a go or no go. It tells him early on, is this even someone who would be a good fit for me? Has to be milestone centric. And again, it has to be repeatable, has to be predictive. So what I mean by that is you need to be able to know with a fair amount of certainty that at this milestone, there's a 25% likelihood that we're gonna work together. And then if we move on to the next one, there's a 40% likelihood that we're gonna work together, so on and so forth. If the process you're currently following is not that predictive, that is not your process. You need to refine the process. And it has to be about your customer. It is not about you. Again, back to the value proposition statement. You're going to share the things that are wonderful about you that are going to help them, but it has to be about them. It's not about you and the information that you need. It's about you together uncovering the information that is vital to understand if this is going to be a successful relationship going forward. So I like to share, this is the Braveheart sales process. You can adapt it and make it your own. Oftentimes when we work with clients, we change the name of it, but we call it the sales ladder. And there are 6 foundational components to the sales ladder. And the first we're going to talk about is relationship building. So show of hands, how many of you would say that you are in a relationship business? Meaning the relationship you have with your customer is important and oftentimes drives the business. That's true in most industries, specifically in the B2B space. Now, the reason the relationship is on one rail of the ladder and is not a rung on the ladder is because this happens the entire time. And when we think about building a relationship, it is more than being buddies. It is more than asking about their kids or the vacation they went on or talking about the weather or being friendly. That's rapport. And that's important, and you need to establish rapport early on, but that is not a relationship. Fun fact, so relationship building is the single most important thing when business owners and sales leaders are surveyed. They say is the most important thing for my salespeople to have. They have to be able to build relationships and have strong relationships. It is also the one finding, so in our work we measure 23 core sales competencies that are predictive of sales success. It is the one finding consistently that top performers and bottom performers have in common. So I tell you that because I'm not trying to shame you and say relationship building isn't important. It is. People need to be likable, and they need to be easy to work with, and they need to be somebody that somebody wants to buy from. But that is just the starting point. That is not the whole deal. So that's why you're doing that all along. And so I have up here, peddler, pal, peer. Oftentimes when you think about the relationship, you think about doing something, anything to establish rapport. You're really just a peddler at that point. You're saying the bare minimum, doing the bare minimum, asking a couple of questions so that they like you, so then you can hawk your wares. That is not a strong relationship. Next is a little bit better. Maybe you've known each other for a while, maybe you do have a good personal relationship, maybe they like you, maybe you go to lunches or coffees together. Wonderful. But it still is not going to drive business. Where we want to be is what we would call a peer. This is where the relationship has been elevated. You have been granted permission by your customer to push back, to challenge them, to ask difficult questions, to tell them when they're contradicting themselves, and to have a real business conversation. So someone earlier said, I'm gonna tell you the truth. I'm gonna tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. That's a peer relationship. And that immediately elevates you and gives you the opportunity to continue along through the process, because everyone knows customers are fickle. They can be challenging at times to close business. And so you need to be able to establish yourself from the very beginning to be able to have those conversations and gain their respect. We are aiming to be respected, not necessarily to be liked. So that's relationship building. The next thing I'm going to talk about is covenants. So you may have heard of covenants, you may not. We like to use it because my mother, who founded the business, comes from the banking world, and so it just fit. So my bankers in the room know what I'm talking about. But it's essentially an upfront agreement where you are giving yourself permission to ask for something in return. It's also a way of setting the ground rules for how this relationship is going to go. And they also are on one of the side rails of the sales ladder because you use them throughout. So anytime you find yourself at a crossroads, anytime your customer is asking for something of you, you should also be setting the expectation that, yes, I'm happy to do that, but when I do that, we're gonna meet and we're gonna talk about it. So you're asking for something in return. A great example is how many times have you had somebody ask for a quote or a proposal, and you work super hard, you make this perfect proposal, you put everything in, everything you talked about, you send it, and then crickets. You hear nothing. So the use of a covenant is really helpful here, where you say, listen, I'm happy to do that. We've had a really good conversation, we've talked about all of these things, and we can deliver on all of these things. But I need to know that if when I put together a proposal and put in the time to do that, and it says everything that you had hoped to see, everything that you said is important to you, that we're gonna have a conversation and you're gonna be in a position to make a decision. And if you aren't in a position to make a decision, we still need to talk about it because clearly I missed something or something went wrong. That's just one example, but the utilization of covenants throughout makes your sales process so much easier, and it also continues to build your relationship throughout, elevating you to a peer rather than a peddler or a pal. It also gives you the accountability, so when they don't do the things that they said they were going to do, when they ghost you, or when they go back on what they said, or when they have an objection about the price, even though they told you beforehand that the budget you had outlined was in line with what they were expecting to pay, you can go back to them and say, hey, I'm confused. You told me this before. We had this agreement that if we met all these conditions, then we were going to be able to work together. So just one example, but using covenants throughout is tremendously helpful. The first step, truly the first milestone on the sales process, is what we call the fundamental buying motive. This is back to that value proposition, the reason they would work with you, and it has to be something that's compelling. It has to be about the growth or potentially saving them money or the potential challenges that they are facing that you are able to alleviate and why that matters. And you need to get as personal as possible. So back to the beginning, we talked about questions. This is where that comes into play. Asking questions here, and I love the first question, just starting out, why are we talking today? Why did you agree to take this meeting? Or why did you reach out? Or why is this something that's important? Why now? When you think about fundamental buying motive and getting to what it is, you need to be like a 6-year-old and just ask why, until they tell you, well, because if I don't do this, I'm gonna lose my job, and I've been under a lot of pressure, and if I lose my job, then I'm not gonna be able to pay for the private school that my kids go to that my wife cares so much about, right? Like, whatever it is, that's what you need to get to truly be able to establish yourself, again, as that peer, and to generate urgency. You need to get to the real why. Next is the authority process. And actually, it's really economics. I have these out of order, but we'll talk about the authority process. So these are all the who, what, when, where, why, what, how questions to understand how the decision is going to be made. So often, especially if you are selling into large corporations, there are multiple decision makers or multiple people involved. Oftentimes, the first person you talk to is not the ultimate decision maker. Or maybe they are, but there's also influencers that you need to consider who can totally tank the deal if you don't consider that. This is also how you understand their timeline. This is also how you understand what else is going to be involved. A great way to understand everything that is involved within your sales process here and within their buying process is to ask, when you've made this sort of investment before, what did that look like? How did that go? Who did you select and why? Who from your organization was involved in that? How quickly can we assemble that team to bring them together so that we can understand what's important to everyone? And so making sure that you are considering all of these factors. And I apologize, I went out of order because economics is actually what I wanted to talk about next. I'm just gonna, well, apparently I left that part out, sorry guys. But you'll notice economics is next, actually before the authority process. And the reason being, when you delay talking about price or what something is going to cost, you immediately erode trust. And so in our philosophy with this sales ladder process, you need to talk about price as early as possible. And I'm not saying you give them a quote, I'm not saying you outline everything in great detail, but you need to understand what they thought this was going to cost, what the problem is currently costing them, and what they expect to be able to pay to fix it. And so when we think about economics, it is not what is the budget. In fact, I hate that question. It is what is the problem costing you, and what will it cost you if you don't fix it? And is it worth them to spend X, whatever your solution costs, in order to avoid that greater cost? So we're talking about ROI here. So then, finally, we get to solutions. So this is where it is a proposal, it's a quote, it's something formal. It should not be a hard close. In fact, in all of the training, we have 37 training modules that we created. We don't do a closing module. Because you shouldn't need it. You shouldn't have to hard close somebody. You should be having conversations all along the way where you're essentially getting to a decision one way or another. And so when it comes time to send a proposal, that should not be the first time you've talked about what this is gonna cost, how much time it's gonna take. That should already have been discussed long before, and this should just be really a formality. You shouldn't have to use tactics or tricks. Selling is not about tricking somebody into doing something that they didn't want to do or something that they don't need. It's about helping solve a problem that maybe they didn't know they had before they spoke to you. It should happen naturally. So if you're dealing with the decision maker, you're doing a good job of being consultative in the way that you're selling. You're actually communicating that value, demonstrating that value. If they are your ICP and there's a need, it should close naturally. And so really, that proposal is more of a formality. So to kind of start to wrap this up, the other things you need to consider, that was really sales process and how you can build out your milestone-centric sales process. There are other things that you need in order to be effective, or as effective as you possibly can, to build out your sales playbook, process being one of them. But some really good things to include, especially if your intention is to have others on your team do the selling for you, would be typical solutions or examples of what you've done for other customers or how people have worked with you and how things could go well. Some stories, success stories work really, really well. And you need to provide them with a list of good questions. Again, we're not scripting them. We don't want robots, we don't want clones. You can give them some ideas of here's how you might conduct this conversation, give them some examples. Ultimately, they need to make it their own, but I'm a big fan of providing your top questions. And then the last piece, if you are expecting others to do this, you need to actually be coaching them. And this is oftentimes where people fall down. Last thing, so there's my economic slide. I mentioned it's not just talking about what the budget is. Assumes that you have uncovered a fundamental buying motive or something that is compelling, a reason that they will actually want to do business with you. A way that you can make sure of this, again, is asking those gap questions of what happens if you don't solve this problem, or what happens if you select this partner and it doesn't work out, or you don't actually get the results that they're promising or the results that you need. That's how you can really understand, is there a compelling reason? And you can go back to that when you have that potential negotiation when it comes to talking about price. So when we think about making sure that you are being paid fully for the value that you deliver, because odds are you deliver tremendous value or you likely wouldn't be here today investing your time, can you assign a dollar value to the problem that they currently have, or the potential problem if they don't work with you? Can you actually calculate what the ROI would be from that? If yes, I would encourage you to do this in every sales conversation you have. And now it's value. Now the conversation about price goes out the window because it's really not about price. The only time there's a price objection is if you aren't going to actually deliver on what you say you're going to do, or it's going to be late, or it's not going to meet the spec, or it's not going to achieve the intended results. So ultimately, you guys, back to really where we started, you first have to think about differentiation, how you differentiate from your customers and from doing nothing if your competition is to do nothing. You need to create a playbook so that you can do this consistently, even if it's just you, making sure you're following the same steps, and make sure that you're getting paid for the value that you deliver. When you do that, price goes out the window. Here's the QR code again for that tool. If you prefer, you can also email me. I have cards up here as well if you're old school like that. But thank you everyone so much. I apologize we did go 5 minutes over, but thanks everyone, and I'll stick around for questions.